This is a terrifying tale that involves a hunt for a killer deep in the woods and a creepy note found in the killer's truck that said, "This boy and girl have been so nice to me. It is going to be a real shame for them when the time comes for me to get rid of them." Hello, my name is Holly, and this is the Murder She Shed, the place we bring attention to the dead right here in my she shed. So give me some cred and hit that like and subscribe button so you can hear more rarely heard true crime right here with me and Simon in my she shed. Well, let's get straight into this case. In early spring of 2008, concerned neighbors reported Randall Lee Smith suspiciously missing from his Ingram Street residence in Pearisburg, Virginia. After his mother died, he just seemed to give up on life. He had lived with his mother and had always been a loner. So one day after her death, Randall took all the pictures off the walls, packed a few belongings, and walked into the woods. He took only a few changes of clothes, some camping and fishing gear, and his dog Bo. On April 28, the water was shut off to his house because of unpaid bills. After that, it was noticed that his mail had not been picked up since March the 3rd. So a missing persons report was filed for Randall Smith. Missing posters were hung at areas near the Appalachian Trail. Randall was born in 1954, and within 6 months of his birth, his parents had already gotten a divorce. His mother, Loretta Smith, raised Randall on her own, and for some reason she decided she would just dress Randall in girl clothing for his first few years of life. Don't know why. So throughout his childhood and his school years, Randall was always telling tall tales, which is how he got his nickname, Lion Randall. People that knew him said he was strange. He was also a loner and preferred the woods and the isolation it provided. Although there's nothing wrong with that, I prefer being out in the country in the woods myself. His uncle would often take him camping, and he had an obsession with collecting arrowheads. Randall left school after 11th grade and made several trips to Newport News, Virginia to work welding jobs in a shipyard. Randall often spoke about girlfriends and even children he claimed to have, but no one knew him to actually have a romantic relationship of any kind. He would also lie about having a home in LA, and numerous other tall tales were told. He told one of his neighbors, "You may hear some things about me that aren't true, that I killed some people." This was actually a lie as well, because he had killed 2 people in the past and had only served 15 years in prison. On May 19, 1981, 27 years before Randall went missing, Robert Mountford Jr. and Laura Susan Ramsey, both 27 and social workers from Maine, were hiking the Appalachian Trail to raise money to help the mentally ill, something they both were very, very passionate about. They were very caring people, and that is exactly how they would get involved with Randall. It is said that the couple and Randall were seen at a store just right off the Appalachian Trail that many hikers stop at as they pass through. Although unknown, it is suspected that friendly Laura struck up a conversation with Randall, and perhaps he became obsessed with her at that point. A few hikers had seen a man with the couple while hiking, and one hiker described the man as acting very eerie. Robert and Laura were supposed to meet a friend at a certain point of their hike, and when they didn't show up, she contacted authorities. This is when authorities would be told about the stranger with the couple. Authorities thought they could get some idea of where the couple might be located at by looking at the log books throughout the trail. Hikers often wrote and signed their names on the logbook when they walked through. But when they went to look, several logbooks were missing. It had been 11 days since the couple had been seen, and then on day 11, investigators arrived at the Wapiti shelter. And at first glance, everything looked normal until the officer looked down and noticed a dark red substance on a floorboard of the shelter. They pulled the board up and had it tested, and sure enough, it matched Robert's DNA. Believing they had a crime scene at the shelter, authorities spread out in the woods looking for clues. Not far from the shelter, they found a small opening in the forest with a mound of leaves that seemed to be placed over something. Bad sign. They began to dig and seeing the edge of a sleeping bag. As they unearthed the sleeping bag and opened it, inside was Laura's body, and over her head was a plastic bag. So the next morning, they brought in cadaver dogs, and one of the dogs immediately went and just sat next to a stump. They grabbed their shovels and found Robert inside of his sleeping bag too. It looked as if Robert had been shot while sleeping in his tent. He was shot in the head. It was assumed that the shot woke Laura up and she fought for her life. She had several defensive marks from fighting Randall. Randall had hit her over the head with an iron bar before stabbing her with a long nail. Then Randall finished her off with a knife. Laura had 13 puncture wounds. She also did have some bruising in her private area, but it was unclear if she had been RAPE'd. Randall then dragged the bodies from the shelter, still inside their sleeping bags, and buried them. He also went about hiding and burying some of their belongings. He did so in a methodical way. It was described as an intricate pattern aligned by compass points. It's speculated he did this so he could come back later and find all of their things and the bodies. They found Laura's camera and was hoping they could find a clue on it, but the film had been pulled out of the camera. Also, Laura's backpack had been dug through, and a book she had been reading had been opened and had Randall's bloody fingerprint in it. And that's how they were able to find out Randall was the killer. Authorities went straight to Randall and his mom's house. Although Randall had already fled, they were able to search the house. They found blood-stained jeans and items that belonged to the now deceased hikers. There was also a strange assortment of PORN that had been laminated and put into plastic sleeves. But the most bizarre find was the homemade sex toys that were fashioned from medical instruments. I've seen a lot of medical instruments as a nurse. I've never seen any that I thought, gee, I should make a toy out of that. And it never came to me. Wow. The last weird piece to the puzzle was a note in Randall's handwriting saying he had been kidnapped by 2 people and was going to be killed. Randall's truck was found at Myrtle Beach about a week later, and inside of the truck was a note that read, This boy and girl have been so nice to me. All the money they gave me is almost gone. It is going to be a real shame for them when the time comes to get rid of them. His girlfriend is so pretty and nice. I will be far away before the truck and these people are found. Then they found a man that looked like Randall, but that man was claiming to suffer from amnesia. Determined to get Randall to reveal who he was, they devised a plan. They went back into the room with Randall, who looked pretty haggard, being dirty and covered in bug bites, and they used this to their advantage. They told Randall that the wounds seemed pretty serious, that he would definitely need medical attention. The amnesia victim agreed, showing how some of his bites had been scratched raw, leaving large open wounds. They said they could get him help, but he would need to sign a medical consent form first. Again, he agreed, and they slid the form in front of him. He hurriedly signed his name, Randall Lee Smith. He ended up serving only 15 of a 30-year sentence, only to be out to possibly murder again. But suddenly in 2008, Randall disappeared into thin air after his death of his mother. On May 6, 2008, dawned a sunshine perfect spring day. Scott, a cook, and Sean, a truck driver, grabbed their gear and headed up the Appalachian Trail for a few days of fishing and camping. The pair didn't know it, but they were camping close to the Wapiti shelter where a couple had been murdered in 1981. The friends loved to trout fish, and Scott had caught 6 big trouts that day. Scott and Sean say they had an uneasy feeling of being watched that day. And though they didn't know it, some hikers had told the local sheriff that they had seen something very odd on the nearby Appalachian Trail. Strange symbols and threatening signs painted on rocks and trees. There were skulls and crossbones painted on the rocks, which said, "Enter at your own risk." Scott drove back to camp after catching his trout. As he was driving, he noticed a skinny dog in the road that looked like it hadn't ate in a while. And so Scott stopped to see about it, as I probably would, and he got out of his truck to check the dog out. He noticed a man walking toward him. As the man approached, he noticed that he was an older man wearing a camouflage jacket, and he looked skinny and ragged like he lived in the woods. They struck up a conversation about fishing, and the stranger said he had no luck today. Scott thought he might be hungry, so he offered some of his fish to this man. Scott returned back to his camp, and as his friend Sean was setting up his tent, Scott decided to go find some firewood. Sean was hard at work setting up his tent when a man walked up and said,
"How you doing? I was fishing with Scott today. My name is Ricky Williams."
Sean always abided by the unwritten rule of the trail to offer aid and friendship to fellow hikers and fishermen. So he invited Ricky to dinner, but he had no idea that he had just invited a murderer into his camp. After Scott returned from gathering firewood, they started a fire. The 3 of them sat around talking and eating trout and beans. Scott even made sure to grill an extra fish for the little hungry dog, Bo, because Scott was still worried about it. It didn't take Lion Randall long before he started telling his new friends about all kinds of things he had done in his life, including attending Virginia Tech and having even written papers for NASA. As the hours ticked by and dusk passed into full darkness, Randall finally determined it was time to be on his way. He stood up, told his dog, "Come on, boy, we need to get back to camp." Sean and Scott had no idea the horrors that the night would bring. Scott suddenly heard pow pow and seen that the man's arm was stuck out towards the direction of his friend. Sean suddenly felt a ring in his head. He couldn't speak and suddenly lost vision in one eye. And with his other eye, he looked up and seen his friend Scott running into the woods with this man chasing him and shooting at him. Sean had seen Scott get shot in the back. Then suddenly survival mode kicked in and he started running for his truck. Sean climbed inside and had only a moment to wonder if his friend had gotten away before he seen a shadow in the rear view mirror. Before Sean could get the truck even started, Randall was at the front window with the gun pointed at his head. Randall pulled the trigger, but luckily he was out of ammunition, so Sean started the truck and floored it through the woods until he got to the road. Meanwhile, Scott was crouched down in the woods and noticed blood was squirting out of his neck. He reached up and stuck his fingers a quarter inch inside the wound to try to plug it up. Scott heard the truck start up, so he knew he had to make it to that road before Sean went by him, because if he was left out here, he knew that he would bleed to death before morning. Scott saw his headlights coming and Sean stopped so Scott can jump in. Scott screamed, "Go, go, we're both shot and we gotta get out of here." And Sean just punched it. Their getaway was a treacherous mountain with drop-offs on either side of the road, 10 to 20 feet deep, and all the while having to wind around sharp bends. They were in shock, losing blood, and the adrenaline was pumping. They both needed medical attention, and soon. Knowing the area, they knew that the closest hospital was over 30 miles away, and that there was no chance for cell phone reception in this dense mountain woods. While those thoughts crossed their minds, so did another. Their attacker could now be chasing them in Scott's truck for all they knew. Suddenly, the truck runs up the side of an embankment because by this time, Sean's face was so swollen up he could hardly see, and the wheels probably come within a foot of going over that 20 to 30 feet embankment, and their truck skid to a stop right there, totally sideways in the road. They made it to the bottom of the mountain though, and suddenly they seen a house, so Sean slams on the brakes. Scott takes off running to the house, screaming, "Call 911, me and my friend have been shot." As the couple answered the door, they looked at the man and he was soaked in blood from head to toe. The woman called 911, but it took the ambulance 45 minutes to get there. And the woman wondered if the men were going to die right there in her house. The whole time the two friends were sitting, waiting. They were more worried about the other one. Scott thought Sean was going to die because he had been shot in the face, but Sean seen the blood running out of Scott's neck and was more worried about him. As the EMTs started working on the men, police were asking Scott, the only one able to talk, for a description of their shooter. He went about explaining the scruffy man with gray hair that they had encountered in the woods. The officers said the description sounded a lot like Randall Smith. As Scott was being put in the ambulance, they were able to show him the missing persons flyer, asking if this was the man who had shot him. He identified Randall Smith as the madman who attacked him and his friend for no reason. When Scott was on the helicopter, he heard the EMT say he has no pulse and he wondered if he was dead. Just like they had done back in 1981, the authorities closed down the trail as they put out an APB for Randall Smith. By this time, Randall was driving Scott's truck headed out, and as the officers were headed in, they spotted him and a chase began. Randall sped up to try and get away, causing him to lose control of the truck as he ran off the road and then flipped it. As the trooper approached the upside-down truck, he shined his flashlight around, noticing that Randall was still in the vehicle along with a .22 caliber laying next to him. The trooper would later say, Randall's eyes peering back at him, "They're the coldest eyes I've ever looked into in my life." This came from a man who had been dealing with criminals for over 30 years. Sean and Scott both survived that night, but 4 nights later, Randall passed away in the jail cell. An officer at the jail had brought him his dinner, and when he didn't come to the door to retrieve it, he called into him. With no reply, the officer opened the door to find Randall unconscious on his side. An attempt was made to revive the inmate, but he was soon pronounced dead at the age of 54. An examination would show that there were no signs of foul play. Randall's death would be attributed to the accident he was involved in when he tried to evade authorities. As Randall was being buried, his dog Bo scratched at his graveside. Bo was later adopted out to a great family where he is well fed and gets daily walks. All right, guys, thanks for joining me at the Murder She Said, and make sure and subscribe for more rarely heard true crime right here from my She Shed. Don't forget to check out my bloopers if you would like. Love y'all. Bye. Have a great week. And happy 4th of July. Gotta add that. Bye. And preferred the woods and the isolation it provided. Although there's nothing wrong with that, I prefer being out in the country in the woods myself. Maybe I'm strange too, I'm not sure. Why am I saying I'm not sure I'm strange? I know I'm strange. There's no way around that. I'm strange, so it's not always a bad thing, I suppose, to be strange, but Randall's gonna be a weird sort of strange. He told one of his neighbors, "You may hear some things about me that aren't true, that I killed some people." Now that's strange. I don't think I go around saying that. That's pretty strange. Yeah. She contacted She had several defensive marks from fighting. What are you going on about? Really? I'm telling a story here. Pattern aligned by compass points. Compass. Yeah, compass. Aligned by compass from the shelter. Still, he's got the lines today. I'm so sorry. As the hours ticked by and dusk passed, it's time to be on his way. I know it's hard to be patient when you're beautiful like you are. You don't need to wait for anybody, do you? Get up! I can't feed you if you don't get up. What was that? Did you just belch on me? Get up and we'll go eat. Oh my God! Lord, how do I get in these predicaments? Oh, my big old baby. I can't breathe, my big old baby. Get up and we'll go eat. I can't get to the food if you don't get up. Simon says we're going to have strange stories in the She Shed, a new series that we're starting. It's going to be so good, isn't it, Simon? They should join us. Yes, they should join us.